This morning, we're going to do part 4 of our series called Good Work. This will be the last one. And as we've been talking over the last number of weeks about work, I also want to talk about the other side of the coin, which is rest. First, I feel like I need to give you a confession. We talked a little bit at the opening of last week's service about chicken sandwiches. I went on a bender this week. I had 3 Popeye sandwiches this week. It's not good. The third one was not on purpose. The third one was my wife's fault. But the first 2 were definitely my fault. And that leads me to something else that I've been doing over the last little while. I told you guys this back in the summer that I was going to start a journey of trying to average 10,000 steps a day. And everybody was like, yay, and they clapped for me because I had done it 1 week. And I threw your praise back because I didn't want it at the time because there was nothing to be excited about. 1 week of 10,000 steps is not exciting. But I have been on a 7-week journey now to do 10,000 steps a day, and I'm getting really, really close, so I would take your applause for this one. Because now it's a habit, right? Like now I've gone past that 6-week barrier. Like it's not just something that I kind of decided to do and then walked away from, no pun intended, but it's something that I've actually been achieving. And you know, one of the things that I've been really surprised at, and I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older, or because I was really that out of shape. But walking that much hurts. Like it really does. Like my hips and my legs and muscles that I forgot I had are in pain from trying to do this. And you know what it made me do? It made me go look on my watch because I get motivated by the little circles. If you have an Apple Watch, you know what I'm talking about. Tracks your daily progress. It's actually a super motivating thing. I didn't think it would be when I bought the watch, but I am committed to like looking. And there are days where I get to 9 o'clock and I've got 50 active calories left on my red, and I actually get up and get off the couch and go do it. It's a really beautiful thing. But you know what? Sometimes I just wish I could pause it. You know there's no pause feature on your goals? On your Apple Watch, there's absolutely nothing. I'm like, what happens to Orthodox Jewish people? Like, why do we forget them? So it's actually really, really funny that in the next update for the Apple Watch, they are releasing, Mike knows, he's got one, and he's kind of an Apple guy like me. They're going to release an update to the software that allows you to pause your goals. Because the truth is, no matter what it is we're doing, sometimes we need to pause, don't we? And it's really interesting to me, like I actually think the fact that it took 14 software updates for this watch, for them to give us the opportunity to pause, says something about us as a culture. That maybe, just maybe, we don't have enough value on rest. Maybe, just maybe, we're a little bit skewed in how we think about work and rest, because everybody's for us closing our circles, but it doesn't feel like anybody's for us just turning the circles off for 24 hours. How can I tell? How do I know that this is actually true? Well, if you start looking into like statistically how we engage with our lives, you start to see patterns emerging like this. Can I ask you to be like a little bit vulnerable? And I know that a lot of you work together, so I'm gonna promise you that there won't be any repercussions from this, okay? But honestly, have any of you in the last month fallen asleep at your desk, even for a quick second? Yep. A few of you honest people have. You know what, statistically speaking, 40% of you working people have fallen asleep at work this month. 40%. I read a story this week as I was preparing about a German banker who was in the middle of a transaction and fell asleep. And the next day, when the bank was reconciling all of its records, they went in and found that they were $300 million short on the bank transactions for that day. Why? Because the German banker fell asleep with his finger on the zero. And what was supposed to be a $3,000 transfer turned into a $300 million transfer. And when we frame it that way, it's funny, right? It is. Until we start to think about, like, what does that actually mean? And what does that say about us? And again, statistically, maybe it's not us, but you got to think that the law of averages plays itself out in most rooms. 65% of us will experience burnout in our lifetime. 65% of us will experience burnout in our lifetime. And 65% of us are at any given time teetering on the edge of burnout. Burnouts, in case you're not 100% sure what exactly that is, because it's a phrase that we toss around, and sometimes it's just used in inappropriate places. But what we mean is burnout is a syndrome resulting from chronic stress that has not been successfully managed. It's characterized by feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from the things that you should care about, like your job and your family, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to your job, your family, your social life, etc. And reduced efficacy, reduced efficiency in almost every area of life. Some symptoms of burnout are chronic fatigue, insomnia, physical symptoms like headaches and stomach aches, anger, isolation, irritability, depression. I wonder if any of those sound like any of us this morning. Because here's the truth. If 65% of us had any other condition, we would call it a pandemic and shut down society. This is serious. And I know that, like, Burnett Church in its history has dealt with the effects of burnout in some of its people and employees in the past. So it's not like an idea that's out there. It's an idea that if we were all just a little bit honest and took a few minutes and evaluated, we would probably find out there are people there or very close. And here's what I want you to know. This is not how God made you to live your life. It's not his plan for our life. See, through this series, as we've thought about work, our theology of work is built on the idea that God himself, A, is a worker, B, gave us work, and that it's supposed to be a good thing. Because we're supposed to be doing things with our lives as members of God's kingdom, as people who are trying to reflect his image, that work out for the common good, that help humanity and the world make progress towards this thing we call the kingdom of heaven coming to earth. And so when God gave us his first set of instructions, I often say this about the Ten Commandments. I don't think the Ten Commandments are like some great, lofty, moral achievement. They actually just set out the basics for what it means to be a human being. And one of them says this, Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you should not do any work, neither you or your son or your daughter, your male or female servants, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. What does that mean, though? Like in our day and age, it had a certain meaning for Jewish people. And I don't think our purpose in going and reading the Bible often is to take ourselves back to living like first century people or people who were living before the Common Era. I think what we're trying to do is figure out the principles that apply to our lives today and bring them forward and go, what does this mean? So I just want to be really clear that I don't think that means that you should just only do church on Sundays, okay? I don't think that it has to get out of control. I lived in an environment when I was a kid where it was we were shut down, especially when I was young. Sundays were like a no-option day. We didn't do anything interesting on Sundays at all. Church was boring when I was a kid. Napping was boring when I was a kid. Church in the evening was even more boring than church in the morning. And then the day was over and I had to go to bed again. I'm not advocating for that. But I am saying that I think, guys, we have to recognize that the God that we come to worship, the God that we claim to serve, the God who we're trying to get to know and figure out exactly how our relationship with him should work out day by day when we come to church, we open the scriptures, and when you open them at home and you read them on your own, says you weren't made just to go and go and go and go and go. And the older I get, the more I realize that maybe there was just a little more wisdom in evaluating how I'm using at least one day a week than I thought there was when I was a kid. You know, when I was a teenager, I went to my mom and I said to her, like, Mom, is it possible that, like, doing things I enjoy on Sunday afternoons might be the kind of rest that God wants for me to have? My mom thinks I should have been a lawyer. And I don't know if I always disagree with her. A good argument is a lot of fun. But I think that it's possible for us to find some balance in our modern life by saying, you know what, I am going to set this time aside to rest, and it doesn't mean that I just have to be boring all day long. Maybe we should be asking ourselves, what kinds of activities actually do fill my sails? What kind of activities put energy back in my tank? Maybe I reserve a day a week for that. Maybe I reserve a day a week for making sure that my life is full and filled up for the other 6 days that I go out. And if it's true, like we talked about last week, that part of the Christian work ethic is to go to work to serve, I will admit you cannot do that ad nauseum with never, ever paying any attention to your own personal energy reserves. It's not supposed to live on one side. I feel like the society just says, like, take care of yourself. Don't worry about anybody else. And sometimes really bad Christian work theology says, don't ever take care of yourself and just go give yourself away all the time and God will just sort it out. But the truth is, like so many things, we're supposed to live in the middle. We honor God when we sit down and we think about, hey, how has God wired me in particular, and what does my rest need to look like? Last weekend, was it last weekend we were away, Phil? Was it only 7 days ago? Holy Moses. Last weekend, the board and I went away. One of the things that we did was a Berkman assessment. Is anybody familiar with the Berkman assessment? It's a personality thing that you do, and it'll kind of give you some idea of how you respond in different situations, in usual situations, and ideal situations, and stressful situations. And so we want to be a good team, so we went away and we did this thing together. One of the things that was really strange about mine is that I live in a place where I want to be with people almost all the time. Like, my interests and usual behavior live way, way up in like the extremely extroverted space until I'm not extroverted anymore. And then I need to come away and I need to be away for very short periods of time. I actually find it really difficult to vacation for 7 days in a row. I tried to do a staycation a couple of weeks ago, and I think I made it to day 2.5 before I came into the office, just to be with other human beings. Why do I tell you that? Not just to self-indulge myself, but to say, look, sometimes we need to know ourselves. We need to do the work to know what rest is going to look like and feel like for you. And it's less about putting a whole day aside or making sure that you're bored out of your wits for one of 7 days, and more about that we actually spend the time looking to God and trying to figure out how he wired us and trying to figure out how we can live more as image bearers of his with full tanks ready to serve when the time comes. Now, some of you might be sitting there thinking, but Pastor, you don't know my life, and you don't know how many things I have to do every week. Finding time to set aside to rest is really, really difficult. I have to go do these activities because I need my kids to fit in, and I need my kids to expend their energy. I need to do this thing over here because it's my side hustle, because I'm not quite making as much money as I'd like, and so I really have to do that. And by the way, my mother-in-law keeps calling me to go over for dinner, and I have to do that too. And I also don't want to let my other family members down, and I don't want to let my kids down. And what if we don't go on that hike one day a week and spend time together? Maybe my kids will go so far off the rails. And we start to get ourselves all wound up. And I think that one of the things that keeps us from resting is that we're constantly living in a state of fear. And our fear is driving our decisions and our perceptions. But you know, when fear comes into your life, it can do two different things, right? The first thing that it can do is that it can caution you against bad behavior, but it can also be an invitation towards better behavior. And I think that's what Jesus would call us to. In Matthew chapter 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says this, "Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is life not more than food, and the body more than clothes?" Jesus constantly calls us back to a place of trusting him. And if he has said the best way that you could live, the image that you were made in, the design for your life was to make sure that you have adequate rest. And I think a lot of the time what we need to do is just trust him a little bit more. And I'm cautious about that because I think that sometimes we use phrases like that, or a very closely related phrase like just have some more faith, in really, really negative ways, right? You know, why didn't God answer my prayer? Well, just have more faith and He'll answer your prayer. I don't think that's the way it works, but in certain cases, I think it's appropriate for us to say, are we investing the kind of trust and faith in God that He calls us to? If we're constantly living in this state of fear, whether it's motivated by our children or our families or the marketing that we see and keeping up with the Joneses and all of those things, if we find ourselves constantly motivated by those things rather than motivated by, but God says it's good for me to take some rest, then maybe faith is what we need today. So what do we do with this? What if you're sitting there and you're thinking about it and you're looking at your calendar and you're realizing, I really don't have any significant restful margin in my life. Sometimes it can be really, really difficult to figure out how to manage ourselves when we're in the middle of the grind. We've made commitments, our kids are on teams, we have work to do, our family's asking us for certain obligations. How do we begin to find some health if we realize that we're not in a healthy place? I listened to a podcast a little while ago, and one of the points in that podcast was, if you find yourself needing advice, here is something that you can do for yourself. Sometimes we try to manage ourselves from within the structures that we're in. What if you imagined that you were advising yourself, but you're not you? So you get like 30,000 feet above your own schedule for a quick second, and you're trying to be a life coach for yourself, right? You're not trying to deal from this perspective inside, right? Because sometimes we just don't see things, but you get yourself up and above the situation and think about, how would I give myself advice if I weren't actually living this rat race crazy life? What would I suggest I do. I find that to be actually a really helpful framework because sometimes I just don't feel like I can do anything. But if I wasn't actually living in the midst of it, if one of you walked into my office and said, okay, Pastor, here's my schedule. I'm not resting enough, but I don't know where I have space for rest. It's way easier for me to give you advice than for me to give myself advice. Does this make any sense at all? Right? You got to put yourself in a mental position where you get outside of the rat race for half a minute and go, how would I advise myself if I was sitting across the table trying to manage my calendar? And maybe even more appropriately, how would Jesus advise me? Like if I sat and had a conversation with him, and he knows how I'm made, and he knows what fills my tank, and he knows what I'm doing that I don't need to be doing, what would he ask me to put aside so that I could spend some more time with him? What would he ask me to do? If I started from a place of trust and just said, Jesus, you can take any of these things out of my life and I'll still trust you. Here's some questions I think I would ask myself. What puts me at rest? What are those things that I do that I actually find restful? Because remember, I'm not saying that rest is just the act of sitting still. I cannot do that. That is not me. And I have been with many of you who I know, you are not in a state of rest when you're not moving. Some of us just need to continue to do some things. Well, what are those things? What are the things that actually add to my energy reserve rather than take away? And then I would ask myself, okay, when are you going to prioritize doing that? Where in your schedule are you able to do that? And if you look at your schedule and there's no room for it, something's got to change. You got to pull something out. What obligations do you not need to be a slave to? What things are getting in the way? Because the third thing is this has to be a priority, right? You have to decide that because God invites me to live in a state of rest, I'm going to choose to live in a state of rest. And I should, to be biblically faithful, just point out that this is not just for you, right? The command is remember the Sabbath and do what? Keep it holy, right? The purpose in rest from God's perspective is to continue to come back to the well, continue to come back to God, continue to look to him as your source, the place where you get filled up, to understand that we are not supposed to be doing this life void of relationship and communication and connection with God. So if I was to go out on a very strong limb from a biblical perspective, part of your rest rhythm has to be worship. And we can talk about what worship looks like, and we can talk about, is it just singing, Pastor, or are there other things that are worshipful? Of course there are other things that are worshipful. But I do mean that I believe, and the earliest followers of Jesus believed this too, that they would put aside a day where it was important to gather with other believers, to worship, to express gratitude, to enjoy one another's company, to get known, to grow, and to serve together. Sometimes I think it feels like you talk to people about making your spiritual community a priority, and it feels like this is a burden for people to put on their calendar. And every time I get that impression from somebody, you know what comes into my head immediately? You're doing it wrong. If this is just another thing that overfills your calendar, something is out of whack. Take that as a sign that something needs to change. Because this shouldn't just be some other thing on your calendar. This shouldn't just be another block of time in a week that's already got too many blocks spoken for. This is the people of God coming together to meet with God and ask Him, what is this little community of faith supposed to be doing now? To express our gratitude, to get filled up together, to enjoy one another's company. Like, this is supposed to be a thing that actually gives you life. And look, if it doesn't feel that way, I get it. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. I want to help you. If that is honestly, like if you're in that place, can I just make an invitation? Can we talk about it? Like, what is it that needs to change? Maybe there are some things that as your pastors, Melissa, Claria, myself, maybe there are things that we can do to help. That's what we're here for. We're here to serve you guys. We're here to love on you guys. We're here to help give a little bit of guidance from time to time. And I guess for today, here's what I want you to know. Rest is an absolutely essential part of healthy life rhythms. You were made with rest in mind. If God can take one of every 7 days off, the world will keep turning if you take one of every 7 days off. And it comes from a genuinely caring place, because burnout is real. If you haven't known somebody yet that has gotten to that place where they topple over the edge and they just aren't functioning because they did too much for too long, please hear this as a very friendly warning that it can and often does happen. And if you won't listen to me, just open up the best-selling book of all time that's got like wisdom that's lasted 8,000 years in it. Let's see what it has to say, because really early on in the book, it will tell you that rest is very important. You were not designed to live on empty. You were designed to live from a place of plenty. Your soul will be most satisfied when it's most aligned with God's purpose and design for you. I'm going to invite the band to come back up. We're going to have one more opportunity just to express our gratitude to God when we finish. But I just want to take a quick second and ask you to be introspective. If you've nodded off to sleep, can you wake up? And just engage for a minute. How are you doing? Honestly. Are you driven by fear or faith when it comes to your life rhythms right now? Maybe it's time to let somebody else step in and step up in this season. Maybe you need to say no to your mom. Maybe you need to make more time for the things that you love. Because this is Jesus' invitation to you and to me, to all of us. Come to me if you are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you what? Rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I want to leave you with one more version of that, because I have always loved these words. This is how Eugene Peterson paraphrases that same verse and tries to give it some modern language. Are you tired? Worn out? Maybe burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you will recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Jesus. I can't think of a person that wouldn't want to experience that. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And God, while we want to be people who take the calling that you've given to us so seriously, to partner with you and work with you, to be noble caretakers of all that you've created, to serve in your name as we go to work every day. While that is important and good, God, we want to also live lives of faith and trust in you. And you call us again and again to find ways to rest in you, to rest with you, to find lightness and freedom for our souls. God, help us to do some really serious introspection. And if there are things that we need to clear out of our lives so that we have more time for the things that you prioritize, that if we trust you and we know you, it will improve not just our lives, but our families' lives and the people around us. This is just as important as the work that we do in partnership with you. Because you never know when there's going to be another moment when you're going to come and you're going to intersect us. And you're going to fill us, or you're going to use us. And God, that's what we want. We want a life filled with moments where heaven and earth meet. So God, pull us nearer and closer to you. Help us to trust in your goodness, your kindness, and your faithfulness. In Jesus' name we ask.